Good afternoon. Again, I want to wish you a happy Feast of St. Francis. And as I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, I kept thinking about my own mother, God rest her soul. She was a registered nurse, and she loved her profession, and as I was growing up, I often heard about things that nurses do, and I decided at an early age that there was no way that I ever wanted to be a nurse because I can't stand the sight of blood. And that was really made very real to me when I was about 16 years old. I think I was about 16, and church was having a blood drive, and it fell upon the youth group, of which I was a member, to set up for the blood drive and to do all that, serve the snacks and whatever. And but it was also the year of my life that I was, I think, qualified to donate blood, because I was 16, and I was really excited about the fact that I was going to be able to give blood and be a part of all that. So, we were setting up for the blood drive and did all that, and then the people started coming in and they were laying on these kind of tables, and I was doing whatever I was doing, but I saw one of the people who was giving blood. They put like a needle in their arm, and then there was a tube, and I saw the red blood rushing through this tube, and I fainted. I fainted. And because of that, I was automatically disqualified that day. But anyway, a few years later, when I was a seminarian, I had the opportunity to go to Ghana, West Africa, and spend a few months there doing what was called a missionary internship. And in Ghana, our friars had a ministry to people who had leprosy. And so when I first arrived there, I didn't know what I was going to be doing when I got there, but when I first arrived there, Brother Vincent, who you might know because he was the director here for a while, he was my supervisor there, and he told me that one of the things that he wanted me to do every day while I was there was to go to the infirmary in the leprosy camp every morning to sit with the nurse who took care of the bandages and things with the people with leprosy. And I was absolutely horrified. I didn't want to say no, but I was just really horrified because I can't stand the sight of blood and anything like that. And as much as I respected my mother, just didn't get into the nursing thing. And no offense to anybody here who's a nurse. But anyway, and so I wound up going over to the leprosy camp and sitting with a very wise old man who was a nurse. And the people who had leprosy there would come into the infirmary, which was nothing more than a pavilion. It was an open-air pavilion. It wasn't exactly like you might think, and they would sit around and wait for their turn. And I sat next to the nurse, and when they would come up to have their bandages changed and their wounds cleaned and whatever, I was supposed to talk to them just to be nice, And quickly found out that although to be very honest, what I saw was rather disgusting, to be honest, sometimes, because those people had pretty severe kind of wounds, and they were often had malformations in their bodies and things like that. And they were really the poorest of the poor. I quickly found out two things. One I think I found out very immediately was that I never met people who had such faith. I never met people who were so joyful in their misery. They were incredibly wonderful people. That was the first thing. And the second thing I quickly realized was that because I knew that, because I had this sense of these beautiful human beings, when I saw wounds or whatever, it didn't matter. It didn't disgust me. I didn't faint. And I really just concentrated on the person. And I really learned a lot during those months that I sat there in that infirmary, and I was really blessed by God greatly, I think. And I share all this because I wanted to, today is the Feast of St. Francis, and one of the things that very much attracts me to St. Francis, and I hope all of us feel the same way, is that St. Francis, I believe, perfectly imitated Jesus in the way that he reached out to people who were suffering and who were in need. This is what Jesus did, constantly, over and over. And St. Francis embraced a Christian life as a young man. He set out to do what Jesus did. That was his passion, to do what Jesus did. And this is something that all of us who call ourselves Christian are sort of required to do. To do as Jesus did. And as a Franciscan, and as I interpret the scriptures from a Franciscan perspective, I often think of the Last Supper of Jesus. Jesus, he offered the bread. He said, "This is my bread. This is my body." He took the cup. He said, "This is the cup of my blood. These things are given for you for the forgiveness of sins." That's what Jesus said. These things are given for you, shed for you, even though you're not worthy, for the forgiveness of sins. And he said, a short time later, after he offered his body and blood and talked about the forgiveness of sins, he invited the apostles to have their feet washed. And Jesus, the Son of God, the Lord of the universe, our Savior, he got down on his knees. He got down on his knees, and he washed their feet. That's pretty incredible. This was sort of a paradigm of the entire ministry of Jesus, of reaching out to the poor and the suffering, to the hungry, to the sick, to the lame, to the blind, to the widows, to the sinner. That's what Jesus did. And after he washed their feet, he said to them, "As I have done, so you must do." That's what he said. As I have done, so you must do. He wasn't talking about simply offering the bread and the wine or washing feet. He was talking about forgiving sins and serving others. As I have done, so you must do. And I think that St. Francis clearly understood what Jesus was talking about. In the gospel today that we just heard, Jesus says, "I give you praise, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to the childlike." Who are the childlike? Children are often used in the scriptures and even in religious art as examples of the poor and the lowly. They're little people. If you look at a a portrait, for example, of Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, who, by the way, was a Franciscan, you'll see often she's accompanied in the image with a person with leprosy, and that person is often depicted as about 2 inches tall. Why? Because they're little people, they're humble. Saint Elizabeth, by the way, founded a hospital to minister to people with leprosy, following the example of Jesus, following the example of St. Francis. And then Jesus says in the gospel today, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest." Who else is labored and burdened but the poor and the needy, the suffering, the sinner? These people they labor and are burdened. Jesus says, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden light, he says. St. Francis understood that. One of my favorite places in Assisi, if you ever have the chance to travel to Assisi, the home of St. Francis, I encourage you to do so. It's a wonderful experience. But anyway, Assisi is built up on a hill. It's on a hillside. The richest people top of the hill, and the people who are middle class kind of live in the middle, and the poor people live at the bottom of the hill. And the really poor people, I'm talking about at the time of Francis, of course, but the really poor people lived in the valley below the hill. Now, we might not think about it because we have modern plumbing, but why do you think the poorest of the poor lived in the valley? Because that's where all the sewage went. Frankly, if you lived at the top of the hill and you were wealthy and you were getting rid of your sewage, it just flowed beneath you. So the poorer you were, the more sewage you had to deal with. That's quite simple. And Francis came from a relatively wealthy family. But after his conversion, where did Francis go? He didn't stay in the city of Assisi. He went out to the valley. He went to live in the valley with the poor people. And there's a place there that's still there. It's a little shrine. It's called San Rufino de Arce. It's a little tiny chapel. It dates from the time of St. Francis. I believe there's a convent there nowadays. It's a nice piece of property, and they have a beautiful view of the hill of Assisi from there. But in the time of Francis, Saint Rufinus de Arce was the little chapel that many people who had leprosy would go to pray and to receive the sacraments. And there were other little chapels out in the valley also. One of them was called St. Mary. Another was called Our Lady of the Angels. And then there was another place called Rivo Turto where our friars settled. But why did they settle out there in the valley and go to those chapels? When I was at that chapel, we had a wonderful visit there. We celebrated Mass, and it was profound for me. Here we were in this small, humble chapel out in the valley where the people with leprosy lived, the ostracized, the despised, those who were never allowed to return home to their city on the hill that they could see clearly every day. Imagine the misery. And St. Francis went there and ministered to them. He begged for them in the town and brought them bread. His followers changed their bandages, showed them love and concern. And that's where Francis established the Franciscan order. there, out there where the sewage was and the poor people lived. And why did he do that? Because Francis understood the message of the gospel. He understood the ministry of Jesus. Take this bread, my body, given for you. Take this cup, my blood, shed for the forgiveness of sins. Allow me to wash your feet and humble myself. And as I have done, so you must do. You must do. So today, as we celebrate St. Francis, we clearly celebrate Jesus himself. We celebrate the Christian message that takes us to the chapel, where we meditate on the scriptures and receive the very life of God in the Eucharist. She can't get it off. Don't you hate that? Oh, there you go. I hate when that happens to me. We come to the chapel today to receive Jesus in the Eucharist, to remember those words that he spoke at the Last Supper, and to follow his mandate, not here in this chapel, but on the other side of the church doors, back in the everyday activities of our lives. We don't have to live out in the valley with the sewage and the people with leprosy. But from wherever we are, as people of faith, as Christian people, as followers of the example of St. Francis, who mirrored Christ so well, we are called by what we do in our Christian response to Jesus to place ourselves in service to others, especially the most needy. This is our calling, everybody's calling, not just Franciscan friars. This is our Christian calling. Jesus says, as I have done, so you must do. As we celebrate St. Francis, let us be grateful for the example of faith that he was. And may we, in our own Christian lives, put into practice the message of the gospel as faithfully as he and his followers did. Amen.